This podcast is brought to you by Customplan Financial Advisors, Inc., an independent insurance managing general agency in Canada. Financialpodcast.ca was developed with one goal in mind: to educate Canadians on important topics that affect their financial well-being and make it readily available to all. We welcome you to plug in and learn with us. If you have questions, please email us at contact@financialpodcast.ca.
Good morning, John. It's Dennis here with the podcast. I'd like to welcome you to our podcast today. We have John Chevreau with Findependence Hub, and he's going to talk to us today a little bit about retirement and financial independence. So, first of all, John, welcome to today's show.
Thank you, Dennis, for having me. It's a pleasure.
So why don't you just go ahead and give us a bit of a history as to how you got into what you're doing, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, well, I guess it all started with this book called Findependence Day, and I'd written several books for the Financial Post, for Key Porter, McGraw-Hill over the years on mutual funds, and the Wealthy Boomer actually led to a discussion forum in a magazine, and so the people behind the Wealthy Boomer, it ultimately sort of folded. But they wanted a new book, and they seemed to think that financial independence was the object. And I just one day I just kind of came up with the phrase Findependence. Obviously, Findependence is just a short contraction of financial independence. But then I was noodling around about it must have been near July 4th. I was thinking about the American Independence Day. So I go financial independence, Findependence Day. That would make a good title for a book. So I mentioned this to this financial services company who I was doing business with, and they said, "Yeah, do you have a book to go with the title?" I said, "No, but I could write one." So I had this title, Findependence Day, which is just the day that you achieve financial independence. And it's not quite the same thing as the day you retire, although people confuse it because retirement is such a big topic for the financial services industry and for the media and the press. So the short term everybody uses is retirement. But what they really mean is financial independence. I can go into the distinctions if you want. I'll give you a chance to ask me a question in the meantime.
Great. Well, the Findependence Day, I mean, that's got a catchy ring to it, and I kind of like that. So why don't you explain what the difference is between Findependence and retirement?
Well, if you've ever been on an airplane, I've written on for Money Sense this idea of a glide path to retirement. And when you fly, the other day I flew back from Los Angeles, and as I was going over the Great Lakes towards Toronto, you notice that what happens? The pilot starts to adjust his altitude. He starts to descend. You don't wait till you get right above the Pearson Airport in Toronto and suddenly vertically dive down, do you? You start the descent an hour before over the Great Lakes, and you gradually fall down. That's the way I look at financial independence. Retirement may have been once upon a time the age 65 compulsory retirement. That's what happened. Big corporations basically wanted to make room for young people, so they created these pensions. But nowadays, people seem to think that they've got to end it all at age 65, and you don't. I mean, in fact, I turned 65 myself next month, and I certainly don't think that I'm slowing down much. But there are ways you can kind of slowly ratchet it back. The 4-day week instead of a 5-day week. Even salaried employees can do that. There's a good book on Tony Robbins wrote a book, Money. I think it's Winning the Game. And he makes some interesting distinctions between the various degrees of even financial independence. So there's the first one is sort of financial security. And when people think I'm Findependent, they say, well, your mortgage or your rent is taken care of. You never have to worry about the landlord coming and asking you for money. You don't have the rent check or the mortgage check. And similarly, other necessities of life like food, transport, we all know what they are. But you can go up a level from there. I think Tony Robbins talks about sort of one level up from financial security is sort of financial thriving, where you have enough money to kind of go out to a restaurant or take the odd vacation or drive a decent car. And there's luxuries of some sort or another. And then up from there is financial independence, where you don't really need to worry about most expenditures. But even beyond that, he has a distinction he calls absolute financial freedom. So these would people I would say, with tens of millions of dollars, and they really don't really worry about the price of anything if they want to do it. So retirement is really merely a line in the sand, if you will. It's a good way to keep track of when you have to collect old age security and CPP, et cetera. But by no means does it mean. I mean, you can be retired and not financially independent if you're in debt, which I don't recommend. Or conversely, like myself, you can be financially independent but not retired. So the two terms are not the same, but I can see how they get easily confused. And so Findependence Hub is basically a website and a blog with daily content that tries to eliminate all these differences.
I do like your analogy about coming in for a landing. It just doesn't happen right now. You start to prepare for it, and the same thing with retirement. And, not everybody's going to retire at the same time, the same way, and we have to learn how to adjust our lifestyle if we don't have the financial means to continue living like we have before.
Yeah, well, and then a year ago I wrote a book with Mike Drack, an ex-banker, called Victory Lap Retirement. And it talks about basically life after Findependence. So, I mean, before Findependence Day talks about how to get to your Findependence Day. But then it's like, oh, now what? A lot of people are going to have 20, 30 years of life after they reach their Findependence or 65 or retirement. So Victory Lap Retirement goes into, now what? But you can see this everywhere in our culture. For example, if you get Netflix, you may have seen a show called Frankie and Grace, or Grace and Frankie.
Yes.
It features 4 actors, all in their 70s, most notably Jane Fonda, but also Sam Waterston, who's known from Law and Order, Lily Tomlin, the comedian, and Martin Sheen. And so what's interesting is, A, they're playing characters who are still working in their 70s, and B, as actors, they themselves are still in their 70s, and obviously having the time of their lives. These people love working for Netflix. It's a TV show like any other TV show, except you get it on Netflix. The characters they play are in their 70s, and in the case of Lily Tomlin and Jane Fonda, they've started a business, a women's products business, shall we say, with rather humorous results. So, and if you look at Jane Fonda, it's like, wow, she's in her 70s? Hard to believe. So I don't think people need to think that they need to go out to pasture. I could talk about a new Facebook group I was involved with called Younger Next Year 2018, if you'd like.
Sure, I'd be interested in hearing about it.
Yeah, a financial advisor of mine actually gives out copies of this book called Younger Next Year, which is a New York Times bestseller, written by an American, 2 authors, one Chris Crowley, who's in his 70s, and his young physician, who was 58, who basically said, you have to exercise every day of the rest of your life. Watch your nutrition. Don't eat garbage. 2 of those 6 days or 7 days should be strength training, and the other 4 cardio, etc. And then, of course, this Thinner this year was a companion book which talked about fitness and eating properly. Anyway, I reviewed this book. I hadn't even known about this book, even though it's been out for 6-7 years. I wrote about it on the Hub. I do a lot of book reviews on the Hub, the Financial Independence Hub, or FindependenceHub.com, on December 30th or 31st. And it led to a whole discussion on Twitter. And ultimately, someone said, we should start a group to support each other in our old age for health. And so we did. I said, well, let's start a Facebook group. So that's what we did. Facebook, and we have about 250 people already on this site, including one of the new co-authors of Thinner this year. What's interesting, though, is almost all those people are financially independent or retired or semi-retired, because it takes a lot of time to commit to working every day working in a gym and going to yoga and etc. But which is one of the themes of Victory Lap Retirement. I mean, Mike Drack, my co-author, is on the site as much as I am now, the Facebook group, because it's all about it's not just about money. It's about what are you going to do. And and in fact, most of the people on this site report that they're in better shape than they were when they're working. One of them, I think his name is Gary, said he didn't even exercise when he had a full-time job. But now this group, they basically figured their full-time job in retirement or semi-retirement or independence, their full-time job is taking care of their bodies, like actually exercising properly, networking with people, keeping the old gray cells running, and taking time to eat properly, whether that means being a vegetarian or watching your blood pressure, etc. So it's an interesting. Just go to Facebook and go and search for Younger Next Year 2018, and you could find it. And I'm one of the moderators, so I'll let you. Anybody who listens to this podcast, I'll be glad to admit to the group. It's an open group.
You are listening to financialpodcast.ca.
Well, I'm certainly going to check it out because I couldn't agree with you more that we need to be in good shape physically, emotionally, mentally, and financially in our retirement years, because it just adds to the dimension of your retirement. And so I'm looking forward to that. So how did Findependence Hub originate, and what is its mandate?
Well, clearly the Findependence Hub, when I wrote Findependence Day, the novel, which is a financial novel about a millennial couple who, I won't go into the whole details, but it's a real novel with plot and characters and setting. And it was written in 2008. Bad timing, you might say. Remember the financial crisis.
Sure.
But it was excerpted in the Financial Post. And, it's a bestseller by Canadian standards. I also wrote a U.S. edition of it, which you can find at Trafford or as a Google, an ebook. And that was in 2012. Around that time, I left the Financial Post, where I'd been a personal finance columnist for 19 years, to become the editor-in-chief of Money Sense magazine, which is well-known, still goes today. And that lasted for a couple of years. And then we came to a mutual decision where I'd become a contractual person. So they became a client rather than an employer. And I was free to write again for the Post and Motley Fool and the Globe and Mail and other people. And in the course of that, I had for Findependence Day, the book, I'd had a site called FindependенceDay.com. But it was basically just a way to sell the book. I wanted an actual daily blogging platform. So I came up with the phrase Findependence Hub, and I reserved the domain names FindependenceHub.com and FinancialIndependenceHub.com. So now if you go to Findependence Hub, which was launched in November 2014, there's content every business day. So I've published more than 1,200 blogs since November 2014. I can't write them all. I probably write 2 or 3 of them. And it kind of gives readers one-stop shopping for what I'm writing for the Post or the Globe or anybody else or Money Sense. But the other 3 or 4 a week are guest blogs. And, you, Dennis, I'd be welcome you to write a guest blog. Usually money doesn't change hands. There's good graphics. You can have links to sites, etc. All I know is, we've got several hundred registered users. People seem to be happy to come back to it every day. There's a daily digest pointing it out. And it's a bit of a community to the extent that people discuss it. It's somewhat like the Facebook group I mentioned, except it's focused on financial independence. Incidentally, North America-wide, not just Canada, about a third of the traffic comes from the U.S. and some of the content's U.S., although it's mostly Canadian, I would say, in all honesty.
Now, you mentioned that you write for Money Sense. You have a retired money column focuses not only on wealth accumulation, but you also talked about deaccumulation or decumulation. Is this because you're in your own victory lap, or what is that?
Well, pretty much. I mean, number one, the magazine, my editor, who's actually an editor I knew when I was at the Financial Post, he knows my whole life history, some of which I've related here. So, since I'm in theory, I hit retirement age. I'll collect my old age security next month or in 2 months when I turn 65. But practicing what I preach, and hopefully I'm eating my own cooking. I'm not going to just stop working. But again, going back to the glide path, I am starting to glide down to maybe be a little more fussy about taking on new assignments. So I didn't really want it to be called retired money because I was trying to make this distinction between retirement and financial independence. So I'd have preferred, the Findependence column. But anyway, they went with retired money because it was sort of like, well, this is you're mostly writing. You're no longer writing about wealth accumulation. You're writing for retired people or people who are almost retired or thinking about being retired. And as we all know, and as an advisor, you'd know that it's quite a different game. Actually, wealth accumulation is pretty simple. You get a job, you set up a pre-authorized checking account, a PAC, and you buy, ideally you maximize your RSP and your TFSA contributions monthly, keeping your taxes down and maximizing your savings. And actually, right now, Chris Crowley, who's the co-author of Younger Next Year, just asked to go to that, be admitted to that group. So I'll have to, when I get a chance, I'll admit him. So the Findependence Hub and Victory Lap are sort of tied together. But the Hub it's been a lot of fun, and it's sort of a big business card for me, I guess you'd call it.
So now there's a lot of talk around retirement and how to retire and whether you should take your CPP at 60 or 65 or delay it to 70 and OAS. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I just said that I'm going to take OAS. There's certain reasons for that. On the other hand, I'm not going to take CPP if I can help it till 70. Why the difference? Well, number one, OAS can be clawed back, as you know. So by the time I hit 70, 71 and my RSP becomes a RIF, I'm going to have forced annual and taxable withdrawals. And once you have more than $75,000 of income coming in, the OAS begins to get clawed back. And of course, by about $125,000, it is totally clawed back. So I figure a bird in the hand. For sure, I won't get clawed back until my RIF becomes big. So I have 5 or 6 years where I might as well take the OAS. On the other hand, CPP does not get clawed back. Now, they're both taxed. And the CPP, if you can wait to 70, is 42% higher payments, monthly payments, than if you're taking a 65. Now, I know a lot of people often will take CPP at 60. In fact, statistically, Canadians tend to take it at 60, even though there's a penalty of something like 36 to 42%. A lot of people take it at 65, but very few people take CPP after 65. I guess they don't trust that it's going to be there. Personally, I think it will be. And so it's a lot better, I think, to delay it if you can. And what do you do? You say, well, how am I going to live? Well, you start taking your RSP down while you're in a lower tax bracket. So I'm assuming a semi-retired person in their 60s, they no longer have highly taxed employment income. You have multiple streams of income, some of which may be non-registered income, some of which may be self-employment income, but a big component should be. Let's say you're only making, we all know that if all you make is $12,000 a year, that's almost tax-free, because when you do your tax return, the first $12,000 or so is the basic personal amount. No taxes available, is taxable on it. So if you're in that tax bracket, it makes sense to at least pull out the first $12,000 from your RSP, because you got a great tax break when you're in the top tax bracket, and now you're in the lower tax bracket. What a great check, because if you wait till 70, 71, you may be back in the top tax bracket. So the same reason that you want to delay, take your OAS right away to avoid clawbacks is also the reason why you don't want to have your CPP. You might as well wait till 70. So better, I say, to take your RSP down in a lower tax bracket and get the second benefit, which is your CPP will be that much higher if you can wait to 70, 71.
You are listening to
Financial Podcast.
.ca.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Now, so a person has come through life, they're getting close to retirement. You want to pensionize your nest egg, or what is the role of annuities in retirement and in pension?
Well, there's a couple of good books I've reviewed on retirement and pension. Now, Pensionizing Your Nest Egg is actually the title of a book written by finance professor at York University, well-known annuity expert, Moshe Milevsky, and his co-author is the financial planner Alexander McQueen. And so Pensionize Your Nest Egg, really, it's aimed at all the vast. Let's talk about the two-tiered pension system in Canada.
Okay.
I think
Yes.
you know what I mean.
Yes.
There are people in the public sector, primarily government workers, federal employees, Ontario government, provincial government employees, municipal, anybody with a big pension, a union-based pension plan. These people have inflation index guaranteed for life, defined benefit pension plans that ultimately are backstopped by the employer. The private sector, and out in West is a lot more in this situation, is a completely different story. We're second-tier systems, entrepreneurs and business people. Look at how the Liberal government went after passive income. They've sort of retrenched with the budget. But nevertheless, most of us are on our own. So we don't have defined benefit pension plans. Maybe we have group RSPs. More likely, we just have a big RSP because, as you know, the less pension income you have, the less pension payments you got, the more you got more room you have in your RSP.
Yes.
But again, RSPs and TFSAs and non-registered savings are not by any means guaranteed. So what you want to do is pensionize them. You want to have the equivalent. Say, hey, I'd like a federal government pension annuity as well, or a pension plan. Well, you can't actually have a DB pension, but you can have an annuity. And this is where the second book that I just reviewed on the Hub, as I call it, by Fred Batiste comes in. I think it's called A Retirement Income for Life. Just came out. And basically he talks about, because Fred is a private sector person, Morneau Chappelle. And he says, well, he's turning 65 as well. Actually, we are the same month. And he's already decided to annuitize 30%. I wrote a piece for Money Sense, and it was on the Hub a couple of weeks ago on this very topic, where Fred kind of controversially said that he was going to pensionize 30% of his RSP right now at age 65. Actually, it was a year ago at age 64, because he felt he was nervous about the stock market and levels. And so whereas people usually and even Molaski and Pensionize Your Nest Egg talks about annuitizing in your 70s or 75, and people say, well, it's interest rates are still low, you should wait. Maybe, but on the other hand, there's something to be said for partially annuitizing. Doesn't mean you're going to annuitize 100% of your RSP in your 60s, but you might start. And it all depends. You got to look at. Remember that the CPP is really an annuity. So is OAS. So is GIS. And if you have a small employer pension plan, DB or DC, you can consider perhaps that to be an annuity. But if you don't have a lot of annuities outside the government, so there's two things you can do. As we said, you can start taking it earlier so that the inflation index annuity that you do have, the CPP, is maximized 40%, 2% higher by waiting to 70. And in the meantime, you can also convert some of your RSP if it's registered assets, to a registered annuity. Because as we know, with interest rates still at lower, maybe what are we lucky to get 2% on a GIC, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas with an annuity, you could guarantee for life maybe a 5 or a 6% return. But the people who don't like annuities will say, yeah, but what if you die? Then the insurance company wins. Perhaps, but first of all, you have your spouse would get the money. And the second of all, you can build in guarantees. So for 10 or 20 years, if both spouses die, your heirs would get the money. Obviously, the more guarantees and bells and whistles and annuities, the less the actual return, because there's nothing for nothing. But anyway, these two books, Pensionize Your Nest Egg and Retirement Income for Life, I think for baby boomers who are either in retirement or thinking about it, would probably a good investment to get hold of those books. You don't have to pay to get on the Financial Independence Hub. It's free, so we're supported by badgers.
Well, that's great, and there's been a lot of information that you've put out there today. So now, if someone wanted to get in touch with you, or if they wanted to join the blog or get more information, how would they do that, John?
Yeah, thanks. Findependence Hub. If the word makes it sound strange, just type out Financial Independence. Hub.com or Findependence Hub will work. You can email me at jonathan@findependencehub.com. You can find me at financialpost.com, at moneysense.ca, sometimes the Globe and Mail. And that's about it. You can get the books, at Trafford.com or Kindle, Victory Lap Retirement, and Findependence Day. Both the U.S. edition is available through Kindle.com as well. So, other than that, hey, I'm practically retired, so I don't need to sell too many books anymore.
Well,
but it's always nice to see a community build on a website.
Well, good for you. And thank you so much for being on today's podcast, and all the best to you. And it was a pleasure.
My pleasure too, Dennis. Thank you for thinking of me.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.
The views expressed here are those of the participants and not those of Customplan Financial Advisors, Inc., its affiliates, or subsidiaries. This is not intended to serve as a complete analysis of every material fact regarding any company, industry, or security. This presentation may contain forward-looking statements. Investors are cautioned not to place undue reliance on such statements, as actual results could vary. This site and podcasts are for general information purposes only and does not constitute investment advice and is not intended as an endorsement of any specific investment product or service. Individual investors should consult with an investment professional about their personal situation. Past performance is not indicative of future results. If you are unsure about what is the best course of action for you in your financial planning, then we suggest you consult a fee-based independent financial advisor or get in touch with us to discuss your individual situation. Our phone number is 604-687-7773.